Good evening and welcome to the Stewart Restoration Advisory Committee meeting. This is our 6th meeting, April 2021. I want to thank all of you for joining us so that we can keep on schedule. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. I know some people are still logging in, but hopefully they'll get in here quickly. Next slide, please. I would like to start off introducing our team. We have with us tonight Robert Subsavage with the National Guard Bureau, Keith Freihofer, and Bill Meyer, also with the National Guard Bureau. With our Stewart Air National Guard team, we have Colonel Edward Cook, Mike Ottinger, and Sarah Pastorello, Master Sergeant Sarah Pastorello, I should say. And with our U.S. Army Corps of Engineers team, we have Michelle Lordman, Kendall Shaw. I'm not sure if Stephen is here with us tonight. And then, of course, we have Burrs Weston and Craig Keating with Wood for our contractors. So that is our team. Hopefully you can see most of our pictures up at the top. So welcome. I'm sure you'll be seeing a number of these faces again throughout the evening. Next slide, please. For our RAC members this evening, we have our list that we always go through. We have Ora Lopez-Zarat, Carla Johnson, Edward Lawson, our co-chair that we'll be hearing from in a moment, Cassie Skylars, John Clark, Laura Garcia, Ramona Burton, Robert Browning, Robert Sanchez-Potter, Ronald Zorilla, Chuck Thomas with the Newburgh Conservation Advisory Council, Jack Caldwell, Quassaic Creek Watershed Alliance, Manna Joe Green with Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Mary Wagner with the Newburgh Clean Water Project, and Victoria Loon with Riverkeeper. We also have Councilman Anthony Grice with the City of Newburgh, Keith Miller with Orange County, and Patrick Hines on behalf of the town of New Windsor. So thank you to our RAC members for joining us as well. Next slide, please. Here is tonight's agenda. We will start with opening remarks from our two co-chairs, Colonel Edward Cook with Stewart Air National Guard Base and Mr. Ed Lawson, our community co-chair. We'll have our RAC business, followed by our environmental updates, RAC open discussion, RAC public questions, and then we'll wrap up the meeting at 8 p.m. I will mention, as we do at every meeting, that we are dedicating 20 minutes at the end of the meeting to those public questions. And so we will do everything we can to make sure we have those 20 minutes set aside, even if we go a little bit longer. But our goal, as always, is to end at 8 p.m. So now I will turn it over for opening remarks. Colonel Cook.
Heather, thank you very much. And good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening as we provide updates regarding our ongoing environmental projects here at Stewart. Since our last meeting, we've been quite busy, and we've heard from members of the community, local organizations, and our congressional delegates. And I'd like to take this opportunity to assure all of you that your messages, letters, and concerns are all being heard, and that we're continuing to move forward with the various agencies involved. Just yesterday, I was down in Washington, D.C. at the National Guard Bureau, meeting with our partners there to continue our path forward, working with the environmental restoration team. We know that the Circla Process, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act process, well, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Is a tough one, and we're dedicating our efforts to remaining that as keeping that as a top priority. We're also moving forward in this process with our federal and our state partners, and we do so, and we're developing clear graphics and information charts. Thanks to Mr. Lawson for helping us work on those, so that everyone can better understand the process as we go through this. So tonight we'll also be discussing the community involvement plan, which of course has an acronym like every government and military agency has to come up with, and that's the CIP. That CIP serves as an update to the 2014 version and has evolved substantially to include now the PFOS and PFOA issues. So the primary objectives of the Stewart Community Involvement Plan are first to encourage and promote two-way communication between all parties and individuals involved, including the residents, state and local officials, and national officials. And secondly, to inform the public of planned and ongoing cleanup actions, major findings, and decisions and the like. So we got a lot going on here tonight, and we want to again thank everyone for their time and your questions. Please throw those in the chat window, and help us facilitate this process as we go forward. So I know that can be frustrating, but I want to again thank you and Mr. Lawson for helping us get through that. And thank you again for your evening. Appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Lawson, over to you.
Thank you so much, Colonel Cook. Greetings again. I want to extend my greetings to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules, interrupting dinner to have this conversation with us, this very important conversation with us. And as Colonel Cook suggested, your voice, your words, your concerns are not unheeded. I can share with you from my perch, we've been able to participate in a virtual lobby day with several congressional senators and congressmen in early April. And just yesterday as well, we were able to have a virtual conversation with the new administrator for US and EPA, Mr. Michael S. Regan. And the other thing I will share is that we are pursuing, as you know, many of you know already, the University of Albany and our principal investigator, Dr. Erin Bell, had applied for funding to do testing around the impacts of PFAS, and we're all set and ready to roll with that program rolling out in July of this summer. In addition to that, Dr. Bell has been arduously scouring the funding sources to find out other funding sources that we might be able to use to implement and to enhance what's going on in Newburgh, to try to engage the population and also to have a better understanding of the impact of PFAS. One in particular I can mention is there's an environmental justice grant that she's going to be pursuing on behalf of, it's not a lot of money, it's only $75,000, but it again speaks to the need to have this conversation and for your voices to be heard. With that said, I just want to share with you some of the highlights of the lobby day and of the virtual conversation with Michael S. Regan. We were certain and sure, by the way, we participated with about 8 other communities who are also being impacted in different ways by the PFAS contamination. But we made it certain, and to his credit, Administrator Regan was quick to suggest that urgency is a very important element of this work. We do not want to just wait and see. He said that he heard our concerns loud and clear, and he would proceed, I think his exact words were, with deliberate speed on trying to address this issue around PFAS. Specifically, he wanted to make sure that there was coordination between interagencies. What he suggested was that there are a lot of people working on this issue of PFAS and contamination, but there's not a lot of collaboration and coordination. So he wanted to make sure that he was an agent in facilitating that coordination between DOD, FDA, and FAA. He also wanted to make sure that he wanted to immediately designate PFAS as a hazardous substance under Circla and quickly finalize groundwater cleanup standards. One of the other things that we mentioned to him, and he indicated his willingness to pursue, is quickly finalizing a PFAS drinking water standard under the SDWA that protects the health and the vulnerable populations. Also quickly reduce the industrial PFAS discharges into the air and water under the CAA and the CWA. He also suggested that we can immediately require all PFAS discharges to be reported through the TRI and ensure that PFAS monitoring under, I hate these acronyms, but this is the only way I can get through it, to UCMR and include all detectable PFAS and total PFAS. One of the major areas of connection that we had with the administrator was using the Toxic Substance Act to demand that more data on health effects of PFAS be completed, and to place a moratorium on new PFAS, prohibit new uses of existing PFAS, and to close any loopholes. So I can go, we talked about a lot of those types of things, and the biggest thing that I think we wanted to get across to him was require safe disposal of PFAS waste, including a moratorium on PFAS incineration and PFAS disposal, and update the sludge rule to require testing in PFAS. So you have to understand, we were able to speak to him. I was, as well as eight of the colleagues from across the country, and instill in him and our concerns and our needs for respective communities. With respect to Newburgh, we were really adamant about, we're thankful that we are able to study and have a small study of our community, but we don't want to be in competition. We think that funds should be deployed to all communities, and we want more funds to Newburgh so that we can get off our current system and get back to the natural vaunted system that we had. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. And please stay tuned, because we'll be reaching out soon.
Thank you so much, Colonel Cook and Mr. Lawson, for your opening remarks. And to Mr. Lawson, welcome to the world of too many acronyms. I hope you start learning them, but also understand how sometimes it's hard for us even to avoid them. Moving on to our next slide, I do want to mention that we have a number of other governmental representatives with us here this evening, including Claire from Senator Gillibrand's office, representatives from the EPA, the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, the New York Department of Health, the City of Newburgh, the New York Department of Transportation, and the Port Authority, and representatives for New Windsor. And so we appreciate all of these other representatives participating in this meeting with us as well. Moving on to our meeting notes and guidelines. During the RAC Open discussion, and I'm sorry to update this point, we do during the RAC Open discussion, RAC members are given the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. We do ask that you try to keep those to 3 minutes in total so that we can keep it moving. For everyone else who is participating, all of our other attendees, thank you again for joining us. We ask that you submit all of your questions into the question module. You should see one with the other controls on your desktop. Submit your questions there. We will address those at the end. We will go in order that they're submitted, and I will read those, and then we will identify the person who will respond to those questions. If we cannot address all of those questions in the 20-minute time period that we have allotted, they will be downloaded, and we will provide written responses to those questions in the final meeting package that will be sent out to the attendees, as well as uploaded to the online administrative record. And if you have any outstanding questions from previous meetings, or want to see what was discussed at previous meetings, we'll have a slide a little bit later that tells you where to find that online administrative record, and you can find the slide presentations, meeting questions from those past meetings. Again, in our handout section, also probably near your questions module, you can find a copy of tonight's agenda, as well as this slide deck presentation that you can download in PDF forms. There's also what we call a little reference guide to the many acronyms that are used. We have tried to define them, and we'll try to say them throughout our presentation. But if there's something that slips by you, please feel free to use that as a reference tool for the acronyms that you might see in our presentation or in other documents that you review. Next slide, please. Moving on to RAC business, next slide. We will be discussing our upcoming meetings. Our next meeting, meeting number 7, will be held July 28th. As we've mentioned at our previous meetings, we're continuing to monitor the ongoing situations with public meeting gatherings, especially as there are changes to the COVID situation. Right now, that meeting will be virtual. If there is a change, we will notify you, but please plan to meet together again in this virtual setting. The meeting after that will be October 27th, and then the first meeting of 2022 will be February 2nd. Right now, those meeting locations, whether they will be virtual or in person, are still to be determined. Hopefully, we'll have some updates on that at our next meeting. Next slide, please. I would now like to open things up to our RAC members. If you have any specific RAC-related business that you would like to discuss, please feel free to raise your hand. Again, this is a time for RAC-related business, not so much questions. We'll get through our presentations and ask the questions then. I'll give you just another moment to pop your hand up if you have a question, but it doesn't look like it. So we will move on to our next slide and into tonight's meeting presentation topics. So first up will be Bill Meyer. We'll be introducing him as the program manager for Stewart. So Bill, welcome.
Hello, glad to be here tonight. This is my first Restoration Advisory Committee meeting, so thought I'd give you a quick bio about me. Recently retired as a colonel in the Army National Guard in 2019. I had a total of 31 years of service, 22 of which were active Guard Reserve. So that's like the active duty equivalent for the Guard. And of that, I have a 25 years plus environmental experience. I started out in private industry working as an environmental consultant. I'm a professional geologist, Wisconsin licensed. Most of my private industry experience was in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Michigan, Illinois type area. And then from there, I came on to Title 10, where I worked with the Army National Guard. My first two assignments, I worked at the Army Guard's top two cleanup sites in the nation. One was Massachusetts Military Reservation that had the Safe Drinking Water Act administrative orders. And then also I went out to Camp Navajo for 3 years to work on a RCRA open burn, open detonation closure project in Arizona. And from there, I probably got about 16 years of environmental experience within the Army Guard, doing a variety of things from environmental compliance, mostly focused on environmental restoration. I had a 2-year tour as an environmental division chief for the Army National Guard, so I was responsible for all 54 states and territories. Went on to work at the Pentagon and a few energy assignments, as well as environmental at the Army headquarters staff. And then my last assignment, I was the director for installations and environment, so all 54 states and territories. And then I did a 1.5 years in private industry doing business development, and here I am. I'm the RPM for the Stewart project. And also part of my military service, I did 2 tours in Afghanistan, one in 2007 and also in 2012. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. So what I wanted to go over here, and they go over this every meeting, but some important links and information for you to remember. There's the administrative record that's online, so all the documents that are finalized for the Stewart project are posted to this web page. And then also another link, an important link, is the Air Force Civil Engineer Center for PFAS information. So this is where you can find information and FAQs on PFAS, what the latest and greatest policies are for Air Force, DOD. A lot of that information is posted up there for your viewing. Next slide, please. So here's a slide on, just how to navigate through the administrative record. I want to point out to you that there's 3 new documents that have been uploaded since the last meeting. There's the final community involvement plan, which Master Sergeant Passarello will give an update on what that is tonight. And then there's also the final relative risk site evaluation fact sheet, which got posted up there, I believe, at the beginning of this week or maybe last week. And then the February 2021 RAC meeting materials are also posted up there. Next slide. So just a kind of an overview of the Circla process and timeframes. Right now, on the bottom, you see the chart that talks about, the different phases of Circla. PASI, we just finished up just recently. Typically, those take 1 to 3 years to do. Right now, for the PFOS project out here, we're at the RI stage. So with the remedial investigation, those typically can take up to 3 to 6 years, depending on the nature and extent of what we're trying to do. The remedial investigations really are to gather data and facts to help us make future decisions on what needs to be cleaned up. And so just to note, at any time through this process, we can do an interim removal action if there's a need, if there's something, a need to do it. And so those are the different phases of that process. One thing I wanted to mention, 31 March, we did get a DERP eligibility. DERP, more acronyms for you tonight, is Defense Environmental Restoration Program. That's a fund that DoD uses to do environmental restoration work. With that's just a type of fund. It doesn't matter, shouldn't matter to you all. It's just a type of money that the DoD uses to do these cleanups and investigations. But we did get DERP eligibility, and right now we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to put together the remedial investigation contract to actually go out and do the remedial investigation. And that's all I have on this. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna, Master Sergeant Sarah Passarello, she's gonna be doing the update on the community involvement plan. I'll hand the baton off.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. We have recently implemented a new community involvement plan. This is serving as an update to the 2014 version. Next slide. So as an update, this plan is specific to communities surrounding the Air National Guard base, and it continues to evolve with the changing regulatory requirements and available technologies based on the internet capabilities, based on evolving chemicals, things that we see coming through. And an example of that would be PFOS, PFOA initiating this document being updated. These community involvement plans, they've been in existence since 1980. In 1980, Congress made public involvement in decision-making a part of the cleanup process and part of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. So now everybody's got Circla down as their acronym of the night. And this plan does follow along with the EPA Superfund Community Involvement Handbook. So it's consistent with the guidelines of the Circla Process and Superfund across the country. Next slide. This describes some of the features of the plan. It's designed to facilitate communication between Stewart, our base, and the communities adjacent to the base regarding our environmental cleanup programs. The primary objective of the Community Involvement Plan, and we like to call it a SIP for short, of course, and it's to encourage and promote our two-way communication similar to tonight between ANG, concerned individuals, including residents, state, and local officials. This also helps to serve as a guide to inform the public of planned and ongoing cleanup actions, major findings, and decisions. It gives us a communication pathway to follow consistency and going forward along the way. You'll find a number of appendices that cover outreach, the questionnaires we provided, online sources, RAC operating procedures, DoD, and community contacts at the end of this document. Next slide. So how do we get this data, especially in the middle of a pandemic? Typically, as the slide said, there would be in-person interviews representing a cross-section of the community, but that was not possible this year in 2020. So we had developed with a contractor that was contracted through NGB. They developed online questionnaires in both English and Spanish. Those questionnaires were sent through letters and postcards. Over 11,000 were sent to sample addresses throughout the city of Newburgh and New Windsor, and they were mailed throughout those areas, in addition to some other areas that may be impacted by the water issues according to the map. Mailings included both website and phone numbers, just in case someone felt more comfortable calling. Both the website and phone number were available in English and Spanish. Bilingual public notices were available in the Times Herald Record, Mid-Hudson News, and also the Hudson Valley Press. After all the mailings were sent out in October of 2020, the questionnaires remained open for 3 weeks. Next slide, please. We did get 120 responses. 114 were completed online questionnaires, and 113 in English, and 1 was completed in Spanish. 14 people called the hotline. They just require some more discussion, and out of those conversations, 6 more completed the questionnaire. The slide below shows a grouping of the individual callers as they describe themselves within the community. Some are local residents, the majority, community leaders, civic group representatives, etc. Next slide. So from the questionnaires, here is the summary of responses we received. And I do want to know, Bill may laugh at me, but none of these numbers add up to 100%. And so that's because there are more than one choice available. You can choose in priority, 1, 2, or 3 choices were available of level of importance to you. So that's important to just to know as you're going through some of these percentages if they don't add up. But the full set of the data results can be found in Appendix B of the SIP, which is going to be available online. But all personal identifying information is redacted, so all respondents have remained anonymous. 75% of our participants are aware of the ongoing environmental investigations around Stewart Air National Guard base. 72% are aware of the PFAS-related activities we're conducting. Out of the questions related to the environmental restoration program, 85% are very interested in health and safety, 80% are very interested in environmental issues, and 41% are very interested in economic issues. 72% were not aware of the Restoration Advisory Committee, our RAC. 65% would prefer virtual meetings, and 56% want in person. 98% have reliable internet to attend websites, virtual public meetings. 69% would prefer to receive information via email. 47% by direct mail, 32% through websites, 28% viewed public notices, and 23% prefer news outlets. And again, all this information is broken down into more detail in that appendix following this document, Appendix B. Next slide. So this slide shows a list of activities that have been conducted at Stewart Air National Guard base prior to COVID-19, what we are currently available to do, like this virtual meeting, for example, and what we would be able to offer in the future as restrictions around COVID-19 lessen. We've done all these in the past. We look forward to working with the RAC to ensure their continued success going forward and to open up the base more. We are extremely transparent in our operations when we are allowed to do so based on health restrictions. And we will definitely be, I would be your point of contact for some of these things. I'm happy to help. My information will be on a follow-up slide. Speaking of that slide, can I go to the next slide? There is my office number as well as Mr. Mike Ottinger. He's our environmental manager. We are your local people at Stewart, and if you have questions about those things that you saw before, site tours, things like that, we are working on doing that once we get the okay to bring everybody on in a safe status. And it's all related to COVID-19, but we will be doing that in the future. We have fact sheets available, and we've already covered the administrative record. Something that Mr. Inger and I have talked about is distributing some instructions on accessing that administrative record over to the library, so people who are accessing the computer not from their home would have an easy way to follow to get to that fact cloud for us. We also have our website linked down there for the programs, environmental programs that you can follow up. And of course, one of our biggest continuity communication avenues is this Restoration Advisory Committee, is your help working with us. So in conjunction, we should be able to keep increasing our communication and our visibility through the community. And if you want to reach out again to my office to try to give us more avenues to do that, we are open to working with you in that way. And technical assistance for public participation TAP is another resource that's available. And with that, I think that's the end of our community involvement plan.
Thank you, Sarah. And if we can go to the next slide, we will go ahead and we can start our 10-minute timer for our RAC questions. If we have any RAC members, please go ahead and use the raise your hand function. And when I see you pop up, we will go ahead and unmute you so that you can ask a question about the community involvement plan.
I'm looking over to see if there's any questions.
All right, Chuck, it looks like I've unmuted you. I think you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I found the unmute button. Thanks so much. I appreciate the information to date. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the AF, the administrative record clarification of the searching that record. I've had some difficulty getting into the record. I was hoping maybe there's a way to put a better link in there. When you search the record, you have to know enough to go to Air National Guard as opposed to active bases and things like that. You also, then you have options for searching. And I tried searching, and this goes to a later slide, but I tried to search PFOS, PFAS, RRSE in the data selection box, and it came up with no records. And so I added Stewart PFOS/PFOA RRSE, and I still got no returns on from the data records. So it's a little tricky to get in there, and I'm hoping we can,
Right.
can help there.
You're absolutely right. That's why we had talked about the instructions. So in the past, I've sent out a PDF of instructions because I feel the same way. And a lot of things like this are a little difficult to get through. Nothing seems to be easy. So there are steps that I've put together that make it a little bit easier. So what I was thinking is that I can bring them down to you over at the library. We can sit together and I can do a training with you, but I can leave these materials out, and I can also give this set of instructions to Heather to follow on with. You're right. So when you're going to that administrative record, you need to click on Air National Guard base, and you need to click on Stewart, and it's not going to necessarily, it won't be categorized by your search keyword, but once you hit Stewart, you're going to have to hit another button that doesn't make sense again, and then it will give you all the records of all time. So you have to kind of look through the dates that way. But if you want to go back to the previous slide, or I can give you my number at the office, 845-563-2075. And I have your email, Chuck, so I'll start with you with this instruction sheet. If it helps you, then we'll send it out to the whole RAC, and we'll also include it with our handouts that Heather's provided here. It's helped Mike and I both navigate the system, and I feel like it's just an easy way to understand the very things that you pointed out.
Thank you, Sarah. A couple quick clarifications. We are happy to have the information available to the public through the computers at the Newburgh Free Library. But just to clarify, I am not the director anymore. I happily entered retirement, so we're
not letting you, but I figured you would be an in, so yeah. Perhaps you can forward me the new director's information.
I will do that for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Are there any other questions from our RAC members? I will give you 1 or 2 more moments. Again, if you want to use the raise your hand function. Victoria, I see you've popped up your hand. I have unmuted you on my end. I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you still want to ask a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thanks. So I was just wondering why the RAC wasn't more involved with the input process for developing the CIP, since that seems to fall into like the purpose of the RAC, that community engagement, community information sharing.
That's a great question. So involved in the process, so like I said, we follow the EPA Superfund template when we're putting it together. and it's a standard template, but one of the things this accounted for was for PFAS, PFOA. So you can see the difference between the previous plan and this plan, and you can always email me and call me and I can compare those two with you. What we did do is we sent out through Heather to the co-chairs the information about this community involvement plan, the questionnaires, the advertisements, the language that was going out, key stakeholders. We have an Excel sheet of everybody that we could think of, at least 80 or so representatives, in addition to our population. So the RAC was included at least since August in the development of this program. But again, when it comes to the final published document, it follows a certain template, but the input provided and the request for information was also solicited through the RAC as best we could do through our contacts within our group here. If there's ways to enhance that going forward, these are updated continually. And once you review it, if there are suggestions that you have on how we can reach out and maybe update in the future, then that's really important for us to know. Like I said, evolving technologies also enable us to contract it again and to take a new look. But I think we can review it first and see where we're at and what kind of information is in there and where we want to go from there. But I understand your concern, and we really try to share with all avenues possible. And I think that if you have any further questions about the content in there, we could set up a time to sit down and go over it. And we're open to suggestions on reaching more people to get that input.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Victoria, for that question. I will, again, open it up for RAC members. If you have questions that you want to ask, please pop your hand up and I will unmute you. For our other community members who are participating, if you have questions, please feel free to enter those questions into our question module, and we will go ahead and respond to those at the end of the meeting. We'll take just another moment or two. Let me see if there's any other hand raises. If not, we will go ahead and move on to our next slide, please.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Sarah. So next up is Bill Meyer, who will be talking about our Site 3 former base landfill long-term management project.
All right. So you can go on to the next slide here. So just a little bit of background information about Site 3. Site 3, the remedy's been in place for over 22 years for the landfill. Right now we're on year 22 of 30 years of sampling that we have to do. We're doing annual sampling right now. And you can see on the bullets here that we were just out there to do the annual sampling on April 12th, where they collected the groundwater, surface water, sediment samples. They did landfill gas monitoring and then actually repaired a monitoring well that had some damage. So this is done on an annual basis, and we're on year 22 of 30 years. So what happens after 30 years? So let's say we go through, we do 30 years of monitoring, and we've got data. We've got the option to petition the regulators for we can either request no more monitoring or maybe reduce monitoring frequency, because the caps on the landfill, over time, the material that's in there degrades and you see changes, but we've got like 22 years worth of data that we've collected that shows what the leachate is, and we're just making sure that that doesn't migrate off-site and cause an issue. So year 22, 8 more to go. Actually, after this one, there'll be 7 more to go. And that's where we're at with Site 3. Gonna go on to the next slide, which will be for Keith Freihofer on the RRSC update. Keith?
Thank you, Bill. Yes, this is an update on the RRSC. The relative risk site evaluation process was presented during the February 3rd RAC meeting. And as a small recap, the RRSE is used by the Department of Defense as methodology to sequence environmental restoration work. RRSE is used to evaluate the relative risk posed by an environmental restoration site in relation to other sites. And RRSE is being implemented to sequence PFOS/PFOA remedial investigations across the Air Force and Air National Guard portfolio. The Stewart RRSE for PFOS/PFOA is now available for public review and comment. The 30-day comment period opened this week. We published public notice in the Times Herald Record, the Mid-Hudson Times, and the Hudson Valley Press. The relative risk site evaluation package is available for download on the administrative record. There were some issues with the admin record last week. It wasn't working, but I just checked it just now. It is up and running, and the RRSE is in there. To find it, it is listed under relative risk site evaluation, so it's not actually listed by the abbreviation RRSE. And then comments from anyone who chooses to review it and provide comments can be submitted to Bill Meyer, and there is his phone number and email address. I'll pass it back to Bill for the next slide.
So we are back to our RAC question time, and this is for questions on the Site 3 former base landfill, as well as the relative risk site evaluation. If any of our RAC members have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. I will call on you and unmute you. Again, for our community members, please feel free to submit those questions via our question module, and we'll read them at the end. Deborah Brown, I believe you're filling in for Mary Wagner again, is that correct?
Yes, thank you. So I'm wondering why the RRSE wasn't immediately sent to the RAC. It was sent today in preparation for this meeting, and it was released on Monday.
So I will answer that if that's all right with Keith and Bill. I'm sorry, we were getting ready for the meeting and making sure that we had all of the slides put together, and so I'm sorry that it didn't get submitted out on Monday as we were trying to prepare for the meeting.
Thank you. I do want to add, though, that I think that for something of this importance, there should be time given to the RAC more than 2 days in advance, more than 3 days in advance, for the RAC to receive the information, digest the information prior to this meeting, which is a community meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Deb. Are there any other questions or comments for the RRSE? It looks like, Chuck, you have your hand raised. I think you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm following up on Deborah Brown's comment, and I agree. I had the same response myself. There was a lovely ad in the Sunday Times Herald Record, April 25th, a quarter of a page or a third of a page ad for the virtual meeting today. And I think it would have behooved us to actually include the RRSE availability within that ad. Would be a great place to start. I just realized as we were going through that it was evidently conveyed through public notice, through the public notice meetings. And I don't know how many of us read those public notices, but not often do I. Especially now, right now, there's all the school board public notices are out there too. So I've just pulled out Sunday or Monday and Tuesday's paper to see if they're in there, and I have not found it yet. But that would have been, you know, having access to that a little sooner would have made a great deal of difference. I waded through it this afternoon as best I could, and I have a lot of questions when we get to that part of the program. So I think it's a little more outreach on the availability of that RRSE, which we've been asking about and knew that it was going to come due for quite a while, but we were waiting with anticipation only to have it dropped on us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. We will go to Manna Joe Green. I think you can unmute yourself, Manna. Manajo, if you're speaking, I think you are still muted and you'll need to unmute yourself. If you are having some technical difficulties, please feel free to enter your question and I can go ahead and read it out of the question module. Sorry about that. Chuck, since we have some time as a RAC member, if you have a specific question on the RRSE that you would like to ask now, please feel free and go ahead and ask that.
I do, thank you. I have to get my notes and my buttons in order here. So with the, I mentioned, clarify the search criteria, which was important. When I'm looking at the summary of the RRSE, or I'm looking for a summary of the RRSE, which I did not find, what I found on slide 3 of the RRSE was that we have 6 sites within the RRSE search area that were classified as high incidence of relative risk, 3 as medium, and 4 sites as low relative risk summary. So what I was trying to do is figure out where that leaves Stewart Air National Guard base in terms of the relative risk site assessment. So we've got, 9 sites that are high or medium risk evaluations and 4 sites that are low risk evaluations. And what I'm trying to head to is and again, I'll probably address some more when we talk about the work at the RAC Pond site. But I'm trying to get to where we sit universally within the, how do we rank? What is the ranking that this particular site has? I think that's what my concern has always been, is that yes, we have water, but our water's not ours. We're buying it. And we've had a reliable and robust water supply for over 100 years. And now we have no water supply that's available to us through Washington Lake. So I'm just trying to figure out where we sit in the big ranking of things when we're all at the gate and asking where we're at. That was kind of the answer I was looking for, and I didn't see that within this evaluation. I thought it was very interesting, but I really didn't get a sense of how we rank overall. Thank you.
Bill, is there anything you want to touch base on that for the future of the investigations on the installation? The RRC is used to sequence the remedial investigations across the Air Force and Air National Guard portfolio. So there will be one of these worksheets put together for every installation that the Air National Guard has and that the Air Force has. There is not a publicized sequencing, so to speak, or ranking that is put out to the public for where each installation stands per se.
So I'm sorry, that kind of leaves me hanging with the question is how, who's making the decision and how will we know if where our ranking sits or what the possibility of us moving forward? Because you had mentioned earlier that there was an interim renewal process that was possible, that we've been determined to be eligible for the Defense Environmental Restoration Program, the DERP. And so now I'm wondering where we would sit relative with the RRSE in the DERP process. Pardon my acronyms.
Hey, this is Bill Meyer. So where we sit right now is we've been approved to do an RI out here. So when Keith talks about sequencing for doing RIs, we've been approved. So whether you're number 10 or number 20 or number 100, we've been approved. So we're moving forward with the RI process. that may not answer your question on how high we score, overall within, the Air Force's portfolio. That I don't know, but we scored well enough to get an RI approved to do that. So.
Thank you, Bill. And so my understanding, and there was a slide earlier, and I didn't print them all out, so I don't have it in front of me, was we were in the 3 to 6 year range for the RI. Is that what I recall?
Yeah, year 3 to 6. I mean, those are sequential. So the first thing is PASI. Those typically take a year to 3 years to do. Once you're done with that, the next logical step is the RI. So that's where we're at right now. We just finished the PASI and finished that piece of it, and now we're moving into the next phase of Circla, the remedial investigation.
Thank you. And
then Jack, I see your hand raised. We'll squeeze in your question, which I think will be our last one for this 10-minute section.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if you could talk about the influence the public comment period of time has on the site evaluation.
Yes, yeah, public comments are solicited and will be taken into consideration in the RRC process when it comes to sequencing RIs across the portfolio. It gives the opportunity to review the data that's presented in the RRC package, which also pulls from the previous PA and SI reports that were completed. So yeah, public comment will be received and reviewed and taken into consideration for future investigations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that looks like it's the end of our 10 minutes. So we will go ahead and move on to our next topic. And I believe if we can go to our next slide, it is the interim stormwater treatment system update with Doug Close with Burrs Weston Services.
Good evening, everyone. Doug Close with Burrs Weston. So we're here again to update you on how things are operating out of interim stormwater treatment system. Next slide, please. So the data that we'll present is both the overall from when the system was finally commissioned and started to run in mid-July through the end of March 31, and then more specifically the quarter in which includes January 1 to March 31. As always, the operation includes us inspecting and sampling our influent, our inner process of our system, and our effluent monitoring for PFAS and PFOA. We continue to do a high-frequency sampling event twice a week. The only time that we're not doing that high frequency would be during a media change-out, where we're only typically looking at the influent and effluent during those periods because the media is being removed in pretty quick order. No changes to the system configuration. The PFAS PFOA treatment regime still comprised of 4 trains. In each of the container is 2 trains. So we'll show you the flow diagram again. Each train is comprised of 3 treatment vessels. So nothing's changed. We're remaining with our 2 granular activated carbon vessels, followed by a polishing ion exchange resin. We did perform a media change of all GAC and resin material in the month of February, and that was a 10-day period from the 8th through the 18th. Next slide, please. So you're familiar, if you've seen or been participating with the flow diagram. The upper left-hand corner is our in-pond pump, which is our intake for the raw REC pond water. It leads into an initial low dose of chemical addition to help with biological growth that quickly goes into a separator that moves out our solids, our larger solids. And then filtration is continued through a series of sand filters, starting with a coarse sand, allowing some of the smaller stuff to go through, taking out the larger, followed by skids of fine sand filter, continuing to filter out all of the, the larger particles and the biogrowth that we see in the REC pond. Filtration of the sand is followed by back filtrations, again, a series of 2 sets. Once that is run through filtration, it's a combined flow that goes into 2 containers and equally divided into our 4 treatment trains. Treatment trains are then combined at the end, and that is where we go out with the effluent to our outfall structure and over the REC pond weir down into Silver Stream. So basically our effluent discharge. Next slide, please. Data summary since July. The system, again, this is a system that I'll jump a little bit ahead, but we've been running about 8.5 months now. The system during this period through the end of March 31 ran for 91% of the time, round the clock. The 9% downtime included some unplanned shutdowns, such as power loss. We had a period where we were down for about 2 days at the base-wide. It also includes planned shutdowns if we needed to shut it down during media change or any kind of maintenance activities that might require us providing some attention to the system. Of 145 of those 262 days, 55%, the pond water level remained below the weir. Those that were in our last meeting and meeting 4, this is a drop. Our seasonal impacts from the winter, we were last reported at 75%. So this period did drop down to a 55% containment. It equated for 106 million gallons of treated water. Of the 69 samples that we collected through March 31, the average influent still remains, that's the water in REC pond as we take it into our system, still remains in the mid-30s, the average at 337 parts per trillion. Our average effluent went up to 7.2 parts per trillion, and 67 of the 69 effluents are below the EPA health advisory.
Doug?
Yes.
Really quick, we've received a number of individuals commenting that you are hard to understand. Could you please make an adjustment to your microphone or move closer to it? I know that there's some, possibly some feedback from it.
Did that help?
No. Sorry.
Okay. Stand by.
Sorry about the interruption. Hopefully we can get some of his microphone issues addressed so it will be easier for everyone to hear Doug. If we want to go ahead and pull up the next slide so it is ready to go when Doug gets back with us.
I think I'm still on audio, but I can't imagine that's any better. Is that better?
It seems a little bit better to me, but if you're still having problems hearing Doug, please just send us a note through the question module. Unfortunately, it might be what it is tonight. But we will make this presentation available to everybody. So please, hopefully it'll be easier to hear in the video if Doug is not coming through clear. So Doug, please try again.
Okay, I think we moved into the next slide. So more focused on the January 1 through March 31. The system ran for 99% of the time. For 38 of those 90 days, the 42%, the pond water remained below the REC pond weir. That's a no bypass into Silver Stream. That period accounted for another additional 42 million gallons of REC pond water. Even though our GAC2, our primary GAC system, provided good PFOS and PFOA treatment, we were still trending at less than 2 parts per trillion at near 12 weeks of operating. We started to see increasing levels of PFOS and PFOA in our GAC1, that's the pre-GAC, where we started to go up towards 50 parts per trillion, which was an indicator for us to start thinking about media exchange. We also realized that our resin exchange material was also starting to elevate and get above 10 parts per trillion. These results and confirmation with our project team, we scheduled a media change for early February. So during that media change, 2 of the effluent samples also detected PFOS and PFOA, which actually went above the EPA health advisory limit. We'll see that in the next slide, please. So this chart is familiar to those that have been participating. On the left-hand side, we see the running average of the influent water. On the right-hand side of the chart, we see the running average of the effluent discharge treated water. What we are reporting with, and the average level is increasing, was during our media exchange, we had a detection in our effluent on 2 occasions, the 9th of February and the 15th of February, where it did exceed our 70 parts per trillion EPA health advisory limit, and then followed up with 55 parts per trillion on a 3rd sample. Next slide.
Doug?
Yes.
This is Michelle. I think we're still having issues. So if my audio is better, I would be willing to take over if that would help, and I can present this for you if my audio is better for everyone.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you guys.
Okay. So as Doug was saying, these graphs show our influent PFOS levels and effluent PFOS, PFOA levels. During the change-out process, we had some issues where the resin was trending above higher levels. The GAC was originally performing really well. So what we did during that change-out is we took the resin offline and just were running each train with the 2 carbon vessels. And what happened in some of our system monitoring sampling that we still take during a media change out was we received results in the effluent that were above our 70 parts per trillion effluent PFOS, PFOA levels. This was for several days during the change out process, and then once all the vessels were changed out, all the GAC and all the resin media was clean, our results since then have been non-detect for the effluent results. So next slide, please. Okay, so with these exceedances, we did some investigation activities to figure out why we had these exceedances, what had happened, essentially a root cause analysis. So what we found, so sorry, I'm not super prepared. Anyway, what we had determined is that our new process will include recycling effluent back into the pond until sampling confirms that it's within compliance during a media change-out process. We did additional analysis, some quality control analysis, some ancillary sampling to ensure that it wasn't a field method error or a lab error. or some other issue in the field that caused this data. So we concluded that what had happened is when we took the ion exchange media offline during the change out, there was this pressure and an unequal flow through the GAC range that created these preferential flow paths, allowing the water not to be treated to the full capacity that the GAC range should have treated them to. Another thing we have determined is we won't be doing that again. We won't be taking the resin offline to change out and just run through 2 tanks. The water will be ran through all 3 in series vessels. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our pond water level graph that we present. It shows the top of the weir and how often we were in a bypass event or had complete capture of the water. In January, we had some rain events that caused us to just go slightly above the weir. Then we maintained capture for about a month, and then we had some other freezing rain in February, which caused us to go above the weir. And essentially since then, we haven't had great capture between February and March because of the significant snowfall and rain events, and then since then the rain melting as the weather has gotten warmer. The airfield has snow, moved off of it, and when this big pile of snow from the large airfield melts, all that water runs into the REC pond. So we're still dealing with the last bits of snow melt from that, but that big pile is almost gone, and so we believe without too many significant rain events coming in the future, we would likely have capture to the levels that were in January and February. Next slide, please. Okay, and with the colder periods, we had good water quality conditions. There was no algae growth, a lower turbidity, except during the high water flows during rain events. As I mentioned, the snow and rain events increased the base flow of the water into the REC pond, and the melting stockpiles have been a large flow into the REC pond, which has reduced our ability to capture water. Next slide, please. And here are some pictures of the snowstorms and the pumps and the ponds and the outfalls. You can kind of see on the left what it looks like in the middle of winter during a big snow event, and the left is, or the right, sorry, is when it is melting. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's some more photos of the impacts of the snow on the pond. You can see on the very far left that we have quite a bit of snow. It's up around the vessel containers. It's a pretty significant amount. And then in the middle, we showed that we did some ice removal from the hose, to ensure our hoses are maintaining flow and there's ice protection so we don't have any breakage or damages. And then in March 23, when we had the big melt and water was flowing pretty well, you can see some of the dead growth moving out of the pond system. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we did a change out of all of the media, all the carbon, all the resin from February 8th to the 18th. And during this change out, all the media was removed. Each vessel was rinsed. New media is placed in the vessel. And then it's checked to make sure it's running good. It's flushed to make sure that it's all settled in the tanks well. And we continue to change the media on one of the 4 treatment trains at a time so that the other 3 are able to run. And as usual, we continue to evaluate performance of our resin to confirm the GAC and resin optimum performance, and our bag filters and sand filters as well. Next slide, please. Here are some photos of our maintenance. On the top left, you can see that we have many large stacks of media. That's our carbon and our resin when it's arriving on site. On the bottom left, you can see that the tank is empty. It's been vacuumed, it's been rinsed, it's cleaned out and ready for new media. Up on the top right is as we're vacuuming the media out of the vessel. So that actually precedes the February 11th picture. And then February 16th is where we have the removal of our used media in these big, large stacks. Again, that will be transported off-site and disposed of. Next slide, please. That's it. Again, thank you for, Doug is much better at presenting this, so thank you for letting me help out.
Thank you, Michelle, for pitching in and helping while we still try to figure out some of Doug's audio issues. I think he's trying to call into the meeting, and so hopefully he'll be able to join us to respond to some of the questions. Again, we will be taking questions on the interim stormwater treatment system. If you are a RAC member, please go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you to ask those questions. Our other community members, please feel free to enter those questions into our question module and we will answer them at the public question time period. So we will go ahead and start our timer. And Chuck, it looks like you were first again to raise your hand. So please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Michelle, for filling in as well. Excuse me. So in terms of the interim stormwater treatment, the ISWT, I have to get used to. Slide 29, you reported that 106 million gallons of rec pond water had been treated. How much water flowed into rec pond that was not treated? Would be the first part of the question. And then the second part is that there were 67 of 69 sample rounds were below the EPA health advisory. And I'm a little confused what that means. Were these samples of the water after treatment through the GAC filter? Does that make sense?
Yes, so I can answer the second one. That is true. The sample results are after the GAC treatment. That's the effluent numbers. And as I mentioned, the only ones that were above the EPA health advisory level were those few samples in the midst of the change-out process. And the number that we have recorded for gallons treated is gallons treated. And I think Bryce may have a percentage. I see him there, so I'm going to call on him. Bryce may have a good percentage, or Colonel DeFeo may have one for what is untreated.
My name's Bryce Fletcher, and I'm working with Doug. So with his audio that's not working, I'm chiming in. But just to clarify, the 67 of the 69 samples, that was the combined effluent from the system, just to be sure that's clear. And then we have our own internal flow meter, it's part of the system. So we're monitoring that every day. That's how we're able to convey what we are treating on a quarterly basis, or since July. We definitely track that. We don't have a meter at the weir, so we track it by days of drawdown, and that's what we've been reporting, days of percent bypass versus days that we do contain it. There is a meter there that's maybe it's not under our control. There is some data that we've looked at. It suggests that like over several months we're 25 to 35% or so. That's a real guesstimate that we capture 25 to 35% of the water overall.
During a very rainy, wet period that we've had the last several months.
Right. That was really over the winter when we during this period where we've lost, we've had a significant amount of rain and snowfall.
And hey, Chuck, one other point. So this is Lieutenant Colonel Rich DeFeo. National Guard Bureau, Environmental Quality. I work for Robert Subasavage. You've heard him brief many times before. But to specifically answer the second part of your question about the two, they were mentioned on slides 31. They're the two sampling numbers that exceeded, if you want to look at that.
You got it. Thank you very much
Yes.
for that response. I do appreciate it. So
You're welcome.
what I'm hearing is that 25 to 35% of the water is being treated right now. This is during, admittedly, the wet winter weather with high rains and snows, which means that 75 or more percent is not being treated. And that water is flowing off into where?
Into Silver Stream.
Silver Stream, which then flows into the Moodna Creek, is that correct? Which then proceeds into the Hudson River.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. And our next RAC member with a question is Anthony Grice. And I believe, Councilman Grice, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comments.
Oh, yeah, so thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So my question is right in line with Chuck's question. I was wondering how much water were we not capturing? I think it's unrealistic to think that we are never going to have a significant rain event or a significant snow event. So let me make it more of a direct question, because if we're only capturing up to 42%, that means 58% isn't being captured. So what is our plan? What is your plan to capture more of the water that's there?
I can take the first step that this is an interim remedial action or an interim action in order to reduce the amount of discharge. That's what we're in the process of doing. The Circla process, doing the remedial investigation, you know, that's going to be where they really figure out the final remedy here.
So yes, sir. To further explain, I mean, you have an interim stormwater treatment system that maxes out at, 500 gallons per minute, and with storm surge and going over the weir, and that we've briefed in previous RACs, you can easily exceed that. So as Bryce just mentioned, this is an interim system. Changes that will be made will be data-derived decisions. And that goes back to what Bryce and others have alluded to with capturing that data during the RI.
Thank you, Colonel DeFeo. And I believe, Deborah Brown, your hand was up and went away. There we go. Oh, I think I muted you. You should be unmuted to ask your question.
There we go. I'm probably really just asking the same question that Councilman Grice is asking, maybe a little different way, but I understand that the system is an interim system and that you have to follow the Circla process. However, you had to come to some kind of decision in order to create the interim system. And I noticed in some of the slides earlier, in one of the slides earlier, that indicated that there was some modification to the system in September. So I guess my question is it possible to modify the system to handle rain events based, as you were saying, on data? And what would it take to make that happen? Is that clear?
This is Bryce again. Just knowing a little bit about, rain events and storm events, we've seen flows over the weir of over 100,000 gallons a minute, which is 2 orders of magnitude, higher than, could be treated. That's why, this process, the Circla process of determining the source and determining the corrective action, that process needs to happen. This is an interim action for, trying to reduce and provide some treatment of this water prior to discharge.
And excuse me, so as Bryce has mentioned, one of the things we're going to be looking at isn't so much increasing the current system because of those orders of magnitude. There's obviously a monetary value that goes with that, but it's decreasing the input of the water that goes into the system. So again, all that is going to come out through some data that's determined through the RI.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Jack Caldwell, I see your hand raised, and I believe you should be able to unmute yourself. Or there we go. And sneak your question in before our 10 minutes is up.
Yes, then it goes with the Colonel's response. It seems the rec pond continues to receive contaminated water. I was just curious, where is that water coming from, and why is the contamination continuing? If that it's not just the rain and the snow, it must come from something else that's that is on the air base.
So yes, 100%. So I almost have to kick this back to our Circla team. I mean, that's again what the RI is going to determine more source, nature, and extent where it's coming from. It's no secret that the AFFF operations at Stewart, led to some of this and where some of the source is. Exact locations will be determined, but the additional influx of the stormwater from other areas that probably does not contain PFAS is one of the other areas that we can look to for source reduction of water, not necessarily reduction of PFOS or PFOA.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And that is our time for questions solely located, or specifically for the interim stormwater treatment system for our RAC members. If we can go to our next slide. I believe our next topic is our RAC discussion, and this is an opportunity, if we go to our next slide, for RAC members again. Feel free to raise your hands. You can ask questions about any of the topics that we've discussed or anything else that you would like to bring up for this group to consider, questions, comments, and it's also an opportunity to request topics for, I don't know why that says April's meeting. I'm sorry, that should say July's meeting. Obviously an oversight on mine. I'm sorry about that. So opportunity to, again, express interest in topics for future meetings. If there's something that you'd want to learn more about or something you think you'd like additional explanation on, please feel free to provide that feedback to us now or after the meeting through questions, comments. You can send those to me. So again, if you would raise your hand if there's a specific question or comment that you would like to make. And I'll say, Jack, it looks like your hand is still up. So I don't know if you have another question. And then Manna Jo, you do have your question. Have you figured out how to unmute yourself, Manna?
Yes, I went off and came back in, and now I have a mute unmute button. So my question is, this is a long, slow process, and ongoing contamination in spite of the interim treatment. It seems to me that just what seems obvious is that increasing the treatment system would help increase the filtration and the capture of PFOS. I know there's the consideration of the weir and the snow and rainfall and all of that. But if it's a 4-unit system and it increased to a 10-unit system, would that not help reduce the amount of contamination that is spreading throughout the watershed So, that's my question.
All right.
Hi. So this is Michelle. I'll answer that if I can. So increasing the size of the treatment system may be an option. As you mentioned, there are other considerations when you consider increasing the size of the system, including possible weir modifications, the amount of space and utilities that are on site to allow for a larger system, and the cost and the maintenance, and those are all considerations. Other considerations, as Lieutenant Colonel DeFeo mentioned, would be diverting clean water. If you divert clean water, then you have less contaminated water to clean up, which perhaps the system that we have could treat just the contaminated inflows if the clean water was diverted. There are other remedies that could come out of the Circla process as well that may be more effective, more cost effective, and could improve your system overall. Lieutenant Colonel?
No, you're correct in everything you've said. Source reduction, again with the RI, if it locates the source removal, but these are all data points and information we just don't have exactly yet. But both of those would be more economical to do in the front end. Sizing up a 500 gallon per minute system to meet tens of thousands of gallons. I mean, I can't do that math in public, but it would be exponential.
Thank you. And then, Vanna, I saw that you submitted your question from earlier about Site 3. Did you want to go ahead and ask that now as well?
Yeah, I think the report told about the monitoring, but not any findings or trends. How often, how long monitoring had gone on, and how often, and sort of how many data points you have, but not what it's showing. And that left me thinking, okay, they're monitoring, but I felt like none of the findings were included in that report.
Okay, so this is Bill Meyer. I guess this was before my time, but in October of 2020, contractor did a presentation on the LTM that they did and provided trends and analysis of the findings from the, back then would have been 21 years worth of data. Right now, from this April sampling event, we expect to have the analytical data in sometime in the next month or so. The draft report is due on July to us. So for the July RAC, if we will be able to do another update on the findings from this April sampling event, and we can go over trends and analysis. I mean, they did a whole presentation on it in October, so I got to imagine that information's in the admin record on the presentation that they did about trends and analysis. They did it for that year's data that they collected, plus all the historical information, I believe. And if not, we can definitely put that on the agenda for the July meeting if that wasn't discussed back in October of 2020.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Anna Jo. Thank you, Bill. Chuck, I see your hand raised. Did you have another question or comment that you would like to bring up at this time?
I do. Thank you, Heather. I went back through the last editions of the newspaper regarding the announcement of the RRSE availability. I went through Sunday, April 25th, Monday, April 26th, and Tuesday, April 27th, and found no public notice about that RRSE being announced. I also went through the Mid-Hudson Times last week It is a weekly paper that comes out on Wednesday, so an issue was due out today. Of course, I get it in the mail, as many of us do, and we won't see it for a couple more days. So I just wanted to note that if we should check that these items were printed. If you got a notice of printing from the time-sealed record, I'd appreciate it, because we would have very happily liked to have known it ahead of time. However, I will note that most of us don't read the legal notices for obvious reasons. So thank you.
Okay, so yeah, Bill Meyer here again. So we have the public notices contracted out through the Seattle Core District, and on Monday, our point of contact there reached out to the publications to purchase the publications. Now, the Hudson Valley Press, that's a weekly thing, so you won't see it until this weekend. I saw the emails going back and forth where they paid for the notices. I just didn't see, they were trying to get them in before this meeting. So it doesn't sound like two of them made it in, the ones that are the paper news. I think the Hudson Valley is like a digital, it's online. So they should be out there. So that's we started it on Monday, and if they're not there right now, then they will be there. Either if they're not there today, tomorrow. And I can follow up and send an email out to everyone if they want to know the exact dates. But the Army Corps of Engineers had contacted them on Monday, and I saw. So does that answer the question? Probably not to.
Not to my satisfaction, but that's okay. I appreciate the answer. And yes, I would like to know what days when they actually tell you when they printed it.
Okay, no problem with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Manager, I see your hand raised again. Did you have an additional question? And again, if there's any other RAC members who have questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you in order. Thanks.
I actually had forgot to lower my hand, but I think what Chuck and others are saying is, are requesting is that when a report becomes available, it's one thing to use public notice, but I think the request is that the RAC be notified directly at that time.
Noted, and thank you for that comment. Again, I'm sorry that we were a little bit delayed in sending out that notice. This time, we'll definitely make note of that for the future. And unfortunately, the timing of when that became available right before the meeting is unfortunate. You do have the opportunity, there is that 30-day public comment period. So when you get time, please feel free to send those questions or comments to Bill, or include those questions as part of the RAC meeting questions that will be addressed as well after the meeting.
Heather, I know you're taking a hit on this, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows the RRSC is news to us as well. So today is Wednesday, and this is news as of Monday. So I think in the communication aspect, we can work together on making sure you get it in the same time frame, but we got it at the same time you did, and it came out on Monday. So it hasn't been sitting here, and we haven't been keeping it, but it is an important topic, and your concerns are definitely being noted, but it's just the timing of the meeting and the timing that it was published that I think we need to take into consideration as well. And just in line with our SIP, that's your quiz to remember what that stands for. Our community involvement plan, we'll work together to make sure that we have that immediately available to you as soon as Heather and we continue to receive those things.
All right, any other questions from our RAC members or comments? If you will pop your hands up, I'll make sure to grab those. I'll give all of our RAC members another couple moments to pop their hands up. If not, we will go ahead and move into our public comment period. Cassie, I see you. I have unmuted you. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I just want to clarify what the publications are. There are two that are very similarly named, Mid-Hudson Times and Mid-Hudson News. Mid-Hudson News is online only, and the Mid-Hudson Times is local, is both in print and online. So if you can just clarify, I personally think the Mid-Hudson Times might be best because it is in print and online in a local newspaper, but I don't know how that decision was made. The second question that I have is on slide 31. The numbers after February don't appear to be listed, so I can't tell if they weren't recorded or if they're just so low that we can't see them. So I just think for clarity for the community, if a different scale could be used if they were recorded, so we can accurately view what those numbers were and keep track for the community. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I will speak to the publications and Bill might be able to confirm. I do believe it is the Mid-Hudson Times, the print publication. They do have print and online. I know for RAC meetings, that is the publication that we use, and I believe the same ones were used with notifications for the community involvement plan as well as the RRSE. As you are aware, it is a weekly newspaper along with the Hudson Valley Press. And so the Mid-Hudson Times would have come out today. So I don't know if that RRSC notification made it into today's or it will be in next week's newspaper. And then the Hudson Valley Press is published on Thursdays. And so hopefully it will be in tomorrow's newspaper. But again, as Bill mentioned, he will get that confirmation and we can send that out to the RAC members.
Yeah, and I can answer the second part of that, the decision that was used. We used the same publications that they use to publish the community involvement plan. So we reached out to Bristol and then Jacobs, who did the community involvement plan, and both venues for the RAC as well as the community involvement plan. Those are the publications that we use. So we wanted to be consistent, so we kept with those two. Over.
And Cassie, I know you work in media for Newburgh, so if you have any suggestions you'd like us to include going forward, please feel free to email them to me because I know that we do have each other's email and I've seen your work, so we're open to your suggestions.
Great, thank you, I will.
And then can we bring up slide 31 for our slide presenter? And I don't know if Bryce or Michelle want to speak to the comment about the scale on slide 31.
I can speak to that. After February, all the results were non-detect. After that sample result of 55, that was when we had our first sample result with all fresh media and all the tanks, and so all the effluent results since then have been non-detect. And the reason we have it at such a high scale is mostly so it matches the scale on the influent PFAS PFOA levels graph just to the left to show visually the decrease from influent to effluent. And if that's an issue, I think we'll take it back to the team to see if it's better changing the scale so that you can see the lower effluent values. Or if you guys think the visual representation is effective, we can keep it that way as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, we will move back to our slide, and it looks like we are at time to start our public comment period or public question period. So I will go ahead and get that started. As a reminder, we will try to get through as many questions as we can. Again, everyone has submitted a number of questions and we appreciate that. Up on the screen now is the reminder to please submit those questions into our questions module and they will be read here in order that they were received. Any questions that we do not have time to respond to tonight, they will be downloaded from the system and written responses will be prepared. They will be included in the meeting materials package that we send out after the meeting. As a note, it will take a few weeks, I would say 2 to 4 weeks. Part of that, it just takes time for us to get the transcript from our court reporter. We also translate that transcript to Spanish. and we need the time to coordinate those responses. So please be patient as we put all of that together before we are able to submit it to you, but we will let you know when it is available in the administrative record and email that out. So please continue submitting your questions to us. Our first question is coming to us tonight from Kevin Phillips, and he asks, can future meetings be offered virtually even when in-person meetings commence? And Sarah or Bill, I don't know if one of you want to take on that question.
You want to do rock, paper, scissors, Bill?
Okay.
So I think I'll weigh in just from a local perspective that we've been able to adapt a lot with this recent year, right? Everybody's been out of their comfort zone. So I think there are things that we can accommodate. That would just include having a dedicated person to kind of do what I'm doing here when you see your question being added to the queue. So we would need to add that kind of person. And Bill, I don't know your thoughts on that, and our ability to add maybe that capacity to just a digital camera being there or having a laptop and allowing these things to be virtual. I don't really see how that would be difficult for us to consider going forward after everything we've learned.
Okay, so we want to be able to do a virtual meeting while we do a live meeting. Is that what you're saying?
Probably for people who couldn't make it that night, or if it's going to be recorded. It actually, the recordings of these meetings come out pretty good. They come out better than when you are in person. So I can see the viability of me bringing a computer and having that. So that might just be
like a simulcast of the meeting while it's going on. Yeah, I don't see it. We got the technology. As long as we got good microphones and cameras, we should be good.
And that's something that people would have to be considerate of too, is in the middle of the meeting, if someone's microphone is off, we may not have the capacity to go and adjust it in the moment. So we can do our best, but I do think it's a good idea. And I think that the recording we get afterwards is a good idea too. So I think that between Bill and I, we can probably figure out something that works to allow that to happen.
Okay, was there a second part to that? Just when we're going back, or just that piece?
I think you just smile and say, yeah.
Just that piece.
All right.
Our next question is coming from Amy Kendall, and it says, even knowing how to get in, and this is for the administrative record, so even knowing how to get into the administrative record, I was not able to get in last week. Not sure if there was an issue. And Amy, I'll go ahead and address that. There was an issue with the administrative record last week. I know that I spoke to Bill about it. He can confirm it. I do believe they have that issue rectified at this point, but it is technology. Sometimes they do have issues and sites aren't working as they should. Bill, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Now, just one other thing with the documents. So when we do these on these slide decks, I gave like a number. There was a number on that admin record. If you search by that, if you have it, if you have the slides and that, you can. That's another way of finding the documents in the admin record, minus going to Stewart. So if you're just doing a general search, that's why we give you that's the document ID number. You should be able to find it that way. But if you don't have the PowerPoints, then you have to go through the regular process.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Mary Kostenblatt. I hope I got that last name correct. I'm looking for where I can find information on the medical data collected via blood test results and health interviews done. I'm not sure who is part of the study. And Sarah, do you have information on that? Or we can see if Wendy from the Department of Health is willing to address that.
And it's also that would also be online. The links to that would be online. But Wendy, I'm sure, can speak more to it.
And Wendy, I have unmuted you. I know also our co-chair, Ed Lawson, might have information to share. Ed, if you are there and want to address that as well.
Yeah, I don't have any updates on any of the medical studies going on right now, so I'd have to go back and ask the group that's doing it.
And that's Wendy Kuhner, correct, from Department of Health?
Kuhner, yep.
Could you tell everybody your website, Wendy?
Our website is www.health.ny.gov.
And if you search for Newburgh blood testing, PFAS, PFOA, Department of Health, that will take you right to it as well.
And then one last chance for Ed Lawson, our co-chair. If you're out there, I don't know if you have anything to add. If not, I will move on. This comment is coming from Dan Shapley. Not a question, but I believe there is an error throughout the RRSE, or relative risk site evaluation, in statements related to the source of drinking water for Stewart Air National Guard. The source is Town of Newburgh, which uses New York City Aqueduct or Chadwick Lake, not Browns Pond, which is a backup for City of Newburgh and Town of New Windsor. So thank you, Dan. I believe Bill and Keith will say that they will take that comment into consideration and review for the RRSE. Again, please feel free. The information is in the presentation, which you can download, as well as in the RRSE of where you can send specific questions and comments about the RRSE, as well as including them here. Our next question from Jack Caldwell, and I believe this is for the interim stormwater treatment system. He is asking, where is the influent coming from and can it be stopped? I know we talked a little bit about that earlier. Is there any other information that you would like to add, Colonel DeFeo?
No, it's pretty similar to what we discussed before. So the influent, I mean, thinking about it like your shopping centers, large impervious surfaces, all the water is collected, goes to storm drains, come out of storm pipes, and in our example, that goes into a rec pond. So can it be stopped? No, not really stop, but there are other things that we can look into, like we discussed, either lessen the amount or divert some of it. But again, all that is just conjecture, and we'll have to wait and see what the RI results are.
Thank you, Colonel DeFeo. And this is possibly an add-on comment question from Dan Shapley. And he's asking, can plowing be managed differently on base to reduce the amount of runoff from piled snow that drains to rec pond? And I don't know if that's something for you or something from Mike or Sarah at the base, or Colonel Cook.
Yeah, specifically, that's probably going to have to come from the base. I know a collection of snow melt and all that, there's usually permits or areas. So Colonel, go ahead.
I was just actually going to say the same thing, but we will look at the plan and see if there is any way of reducing that. And Mike and I can talk about that tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you. The next question is directed at Michelle. How can the pump capacity be increased? If it is running 99% of the time, it's no wonder that any precipitation results in non-treatment. And this question is from Kevin Phillips.
Okay, I'm gonna try to answer this to the best of my knowledge. I may need help to turn it over to Doug if his audio is back, or Bryce, it's the engineers and the specialist. But our pump is not running at 500 gallons per minute all the time. During lower precipitation periods, it's lowered to accommodate the lower inflows into the pond, so that way we don't draw the pond too low, which would stir up sediment and other issues that could damage our system, and we don't want to stir up. During the precipitation events, it is increased to 500 gallons per minute, which is our max capacity of our treatment system. We cannot go higher than 500 gallons per minute. When the system was designed, it was designed with 500 gallons per minute in mind. Very early in the Stewart and National Guard base investigation process, before the stormwater analysis was complete because the Guard was stepping out, trying to get in front of this problem, trying to mitigate some of the contamination leaving the base. And since then, these additional investigations, the expanded SI, the stormwater flow system, have showed us that the inflows during rain events are double or more than the 500 gallons per minute anticipated in the very early understanding of the pond and the pond treatment needed.
Thank you. Any additions, Bryce, or did Michelle cover it?
I think she covered it fine. When we do have these rain events, you know, we get a lot of solids coming down to the system. We kind of do slow the system down when we have an overflow. We know we can't contain it. When we have high turbidity, we do slow it down during those periods. And certainly when we do get drawdown, when we do have time to draw that pond down, we will slow it down again, knowing that we're down near the bottom of, you know, we can't draw it anymore because we'll start taking in solids off the bottom of the pond. So, but yep, you got it.
And as I mentioned, a lot of what we do is in order to protect the system. If these solids or sediments are introduced to the system, they can severely damage it, render it inoperable, and then there would be no treatment until the system was repaired.
Thank you. Our next question comment comes from Rick Scheuer. Please provide the date the system resin media was changed out prior to the February change out. How much water was processed during that period, and re-clarify how many carbon changeouts occurred between the resin changeouts.
So the full media changeout event that we mentioned this time was complete on February 18th. During our last quarterly update, the period between October and December, we did do a carbon media change out. That was just for the carbon media. The resin was maintained. So this resin has, the last resin was utilized through 2 carbon system change outs. And to the how much water question, I'll turn it over to Bryce.
So yeah, just to make sure that's clear, in early November, we changed out just the carbon. And then in September, we changed out all the resin and all the carbon. So a full change out was done in late September. I can't quote the dates. I'm sure it was in our last presentation. And then in early November, we just changed out the GAC because the resin was still doing great and it didn't warrant to be changed out. And then we did a complete change out here in early February.
All right, and a follow-on to that, again from Rick Scheuer. Please clarify the change-out process between carbon unit number 1, carbon unit number 2, and the resin effluent.
So our change-out process is we take one train offline while the other 3 are online. And once that train is offline, we're removing media, we're cleaning the vessels, and we're installing new media. For this last media exchange, we kind of talked about it in the presentation. We elected to also take off the resin because its performance was diminished and the carbon was doing well. But that was the one change that we did during this February change.
And another stormwater treatment system question from Kevin Phillips. Is Bryce saying that capturing 25 to 30% of stormwater is acceptable?
that number is a real wild guess. I mean, I think the better numbers that we can track and monitor are really the days of capture. And I don't think any of us are conveying whether it's, at least I'm not in a position to convey. We're running the treatment system, the interim stormwater treatment system, to the maximum extent practical. And our number one goal is to stop bypass as much as we can. And we're doing that to the best of our ability. I can assure you of that.
And this question is, oh, sorry.
No, I wasn't going to add on. He's exactly right. The information presented here is as factual as we can make it. Some of the other on-the-fly numbers are good educated guesses, but none of them convey, whether that's really good or really bad. All we can state is the system itself works properly compared to stormwater flow over the weir. That's not something we can really compare the two to.
Thank you. The next question is coming from Dan Shapley. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Thank you for pointing out that I was getting that incorrect. I will try to remember that for the future. He asks, of the 69 effluent samples, how many exceeded one of New York State's maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, which are 10 parts per trillion for PFOA or 10 parts per trillion for PFOS, as compared to the 70 parts per trillion federal health advisory level?
So I can answer that one, Heather. There were a total of 5 samples that exceeded the 10 parts per trillion. And I think you could see 3 on the slide. I forget which slide it is.
31.
Slide 31. There were 2 before that, which was also, and I think we tried to explain, it was in our rationale for why we took the resin offline. We were seeing that trend going up. And, we thought at the time, certainly it didn't prove to be a good decision on that respect, but we thought at the time that was the right course of action because we weren't seeing good performance of that resin. So, but a total of 5.
All right, thank you. Our next question. Oh, I think we had a comment in. Ed Lawson, I see a comment that you were trying to ask a question, but couldn't raise your hand. Did you still have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yes. So I was quickly reading, and I don't want to make any misstatements, but I was quickly reading the RRSE, and it looked like it stated that the pollution started in 2016. And I was just curious about that because I was under the impression that it was a ongoing thing for years, but we detected it in 2016, or we became aware of it.
So Keith or Bill, are you able to respond to Mr. Lawson's question?
Yeah, this is Bill Meyer. With the PASI, I know that there were some historical accounts of the PFOA, the AFFF foam being used and being part of the, the potential sources out there. That's why we did the PASI. I'll have to go through look at the RRSC. I think the intent of that was that they started evaluating that because I think the PASI started back in 2016 timeframe where they did the preliminary assessment. So, but we can go back and look at that specific statement. If I don't have it up in front of me right now to look at it, but I would think that was the intent of a 2016 date. I think when we started doing, evaluating the AFFF out at Stewart.
Specifically, I'm just for clarity, it was in the site summary space,
Okay.
and it gave brief description of receptors.
Okay.
And it says that this, I'm just trying to find it. Oh, it says that the city of Newburgh historical drinking water was Lake Washington, which did not receive surface water from the basin until 2016, when a diverter in Silver Stream began sending water southward to Mootna Creek due to the impact. So I was just under a different sort of narrative, and I just wanted to be clear about when you do these brief descriptors of receptors, so what's the true narrative? And I think maybe as I'll make a comment, obviously during a 30-day period,
Sure.
but I think just in general, we really want to get this right, especially as far as the site summary is concerned. And to that end, I would also add, where is the PFAS and PFOA coming from as a general rule? Because there was some indication that there were some stormwater systems that were also impacting it. And so I think what would be helpful is to, and I will certainly make comment, as we do the site summary, to get a really detailed understanding of the source of the PFAS and the current flow of the PFAS, and certainly the historical reference to any kind of PFAS and contamination.
Yeah, okay. And like you said, I think they pulled a lot of the data from the PASI because that's the data source that we have to when they did the the RRSC. And when they do the RI, they're definitely going to know where the sources are coming from. So these were potential release areas that they identified in the PASI. That's how they were incorporated into this RRSC. So we can look at that and definitely make comments on that and as part of the comment period. And that's why we do public comments.
Bill, I just want to mention too for Mr. Lawson that 2016 Newburgh declared a state of emergency. So they were receiving surface water from our lake, from Rec Pond, up until that state of emergency was declared. And there's a diverter over by a road 300, and that was then changed. That diversion was adjusted. Maybe Mike can talk a little bit to that, or we can follow up with it later. But that part on page 4 of the RRSC, that's what that's indicating, is once the state of emergency was used by the city of Newburgh, then they changed the diverter, and that was to offset the surface water coming from Rec Pond.
Yes, Sarah, and you're totally correct, and we will make sure to look at what is on there and make sure that everything is correct. I've been there throughout this whole process, so I'm definitely going to review the document and make sure that it is accurate and we do get the correct story.
Yeah,
and that's what it does say here in this paragraph, but I'm just wondering if maybe it's not saying that it was that it started in 2016. It was receiving our water until 2016.
Yeah,
and that was
so you can see how it's unclear because it's talking about a site. It's a brief descriptor of receptors.
Right.
And so everything you just said, I think, if we're going to talk about the site, or if it's in the site summary, if it's not there, then what I just did is liable to happen as well. People can misinterpret, people can misunderstand. So I think I thank you for the explanation, but I think what I'm suggesting is that we become really thorough and detailed. And this is not an attack; it's just let's get it right and let's sort of understand it. I just wanted to comment on the other conversations about the publishing and the other thing. I think some of these things can and should be discussed as far in advance as possible. So hopefully we can get a better rhythm around communicating outside of the RAC meetings. I know, Sarah, and you and I talked about being able to communicate a little bit better so that some of the things that happen this week, at least we can head them off at the pass. Oh yeah, I talked to Sarah. I know that this is coming down the pipe. It might, because when it happens, and then we have to go back and explain, it creates a little bit of awkwardness. And so let's try to create some sort of regular piece. And I wrote your name down, and I'm going to try to pick your email out from the bunch, Sarah, so that we can maybe get that going.
Okay, and you're completely right, because just like all positions, jobs, and situations, we do have some turnover. So one consistent thing that you will see, like that one slide, is Mr. Einger and I are at Stewart. a lot of the other program managers that you're seeing in our RAC meetings and our co-chairs, they have been revolving over time. So some of the historical information that we have, it's a good point you make. Mike and I, we maintain a timeline just so we can keep it straight. And those are some things that we can work with you to give you that back history. So it's never a public affairs place to come in and weigh on an environmental situation. So sometimes I hesitate, but you bring up a good point by asking the question, and it's something going forward that we could probably have a document that just says, here's the historical references of what we've experienced, and this is what this document may be referring to in case you weren't involved in 2016. This is where we're coming from. So I think it's great you brought it up, and it'll be helpful going forward.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And thank you, Ed Lawson, for those comments. We are just past the 8 o'clock hour, so that does bring our public comment period to an end. I know there are still a few additional questions that we didn't have a chance to address. So as I mentioned earlier, please watch out for the information about our RAC presentation. If we can move to the next slide, please. There's also an opportunity for everyone to submit questions to Victoria Loon, one of our RAC members. After the meeting, we'll be taking those questions from RAC members, from community members through May 14th. You can keep sending questions. It's just we need to have some sort of cutoff so we can address those questions and get them included in those RAC materials. And so please send those questions in, either use these last few moments online to submit those questions, or definitely send them in, and we will include them with the overall questions that we send out in that RAC package I was discussing earlier. I do want to open it up to our co-chairs, Colonel Cook and Mr. Lawson, if you would like to make any final comments. Colonel Cook, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. I'd like to thank all of our engineers, our program managers and advisors for their continuing efforts to mitigate the impact of PFAS and PFOA on our community, and also for their passion to find new and better ways of moving us forward as we go through this. I'd also like to thank all of our RAC members who joined us tonight, all of our community members for their time and input and questions. Great questions, absolutely. Together we're going to find a better way of handling the situation that we're in and improving it. And with now 59 people on board, that's a lot of perspectives and a lot of brain power to do that. So thank you for that. And personally, from a personal perspective, and this perspective as the Stewart lead, I just want you all to know that I'm committed and will remain focused on doing as much as possible to move us forward and to maintain timely and accurate communications, and with as much transparency as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lawson and wish you all a good night. Thank you.
I too want to thank everyone for joining and participating. It's a long night. Again, we interrupt dinner, interrupt time with children and family. So we appreciate the effort that you put into this really important issue. I also would like to welcome the NAACP representatives. I received a missive from them indicating that water contamination is going to be one of their chief stone issues or capstone issues. So we welcome them to the conversation. I will be coordinating a presentation for them and their constituency. And more voices, as the Colonel just mentioned, are great because this is a collaborative effort. It's going to take all of us. There's two African proverbs I'll refer to. The first is a well-known one, but often misquoted. It takes a whole village to raise a child. Most times we say it takes a village to raise a child. The second one is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that is what we are attempting to do. We're attempting to work at this very important issue that impacts our community together. And so if it gets a little tense, if it gets a little bit excited from time to time, all that is about the passion that we have about the health and welfare of our community, to make sure that everyone is safe and is able to thrive. And we know that our partners on the RAC committee are committed to that, and we are just trying to do our level best. None of us are getting paid, to do this, to really try to make a difference in this part of the country as it relates to this very serious issue. So I thank you again for coming out. Stay tuned to information about what we're doing in the community, specifically around the grant that I mentioned earlier and during my opening remarks, because we will be relying on you to get the word out and the message out. We're looking to test upwards to 1,000 people, men, women, and children in the community, so that we can make sure we understand this dreaded situation as quickly as possible. So thank you all. Have a great night, and I really appreciate your time.
And Mr. Lawson, really quick, I know there was a question earlier about that study. Where should people keep tuned to get information about that once it becomes available?
So we're going to use the NAACP as our one of the caveats to get the message out. You know, obviously there are RAC members, Riverkeeper, and others that have been posting and getting the message out, but it's going to be, I think the seminal one would be the NAACP, to get messaging out, to have community forums. There's going to be an opportunity for people to be hired, you know, as employees. We're working with the school district as well to see if there's some correlation between the Health Service Academy and this work that we're doing around service learning projects. So trust me, we'll get the message out, and you'll be hearing from us within in May and in June about what's going on.
Thank you. Again, thank you to everybody for participating tonight. We appreciate you taking the time for submitting all of your questions. I would like to give that final reminder. We are at the beginning of the RRSE comment period, and so there's the opportunity to submit those questions and comments on that RRSE evaluation. So please send those in to Bill if you have any questions or comments about that. Again, our next meeting will be July 28th, I believe, at the last Wednesday of July. So we look forward to seeing all of you then. And please remember, before we close out the meeting, if you have not already downloaded the handouts for tonight, including the copy of the presentation, which has all of the contact information for Bill, for Sarah, for Mike, please do so now before we close out. Please have a good evening. Good night.